everyone to the March 4 Panelist Board meeting. Please stand for the Invocation and Pledge, which will be led by Vice Mayor Patty Reed.
Thank you. Dear Lord, may we take a moment to thank you for blessing everyone here today. We have been trusted to represent our communities, neighbors, and friends, which is truly a blessing. May our minds be open to your presence and guidance in doing what is right by our people. I know each of us are sending prayers to you for your hand's guidance for the people in Ukraine during this terrible time. Godspeed to all in Ukraine and who are heading that way. Amen.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll start with introductions, and we will start with Commissioner Dave Edgars from our Pinellas County.
Dave Edgars, Pinellas County Commission.
Michael Smith, Commissioner, Vice Mayor, City of Largo.
Julie Ward-Bajowski, Mayor of the Great City of Dunedin.
Bonnie Noble, Council Member for Kenneth City, representing the inland communities.
Vice Mayor Patty Reed, representing the City of Pinellas Park.
Karen Seal, Pinellas County Commission.
Councilmember Brandy Gabbard, City of St. Pete.
Clifford Mers, Commissioner to City of Safety Harbor, representing the cities of Safety Harbor, Oldsmar, and Tarpon Springs.
Richie Floyd, Council Member, City of St. Pete.
And I'm Cookie Kennedy, Mayor of the City of Indian Rocks Beach, representing the beach communities. And with that, Tina, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak, citizens to be heard today?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have two citizens that wish to be heard today. The first is Neil Cosentino.
Neil, if you'd like to come forward. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Madam Chairman, members of the board, and all the staff. My name is Neil Cosentino, and I'm a member of a small public interest think tank. I'm also a retired Air Force pilot, and my mission today, a vision, mission, goal, is to introduce the Clean Millennium Bridge project, which involves repurposing a bridge that our government plans to demolish, the Howard Franklin Bridge, which is a 60-foot wide, 2.5-mile long bridge. And that bridge will be demolished at a cost of $35 million when the new 8-lane bridge opens. We would like to repurpose the bridge. The bridge has a safety rating the day it closes of near 90% for 40-ton trucks. Whereas we would only put a solar array on the bridge, which would create income to maintain the bridge and also create a new trail crossing the bay. And there are many wins, and I'll just name a few, and then hopefully you would have some questions about this project. There's precedence because, as I recall, Pinellas was a leader in saving the Gandy Bridge. And one of the problems with the Gandy Bridge was funding. But if we have a solar array on the bridge, which is 60 foot wide and 2.5 miles long, we would create clean energy, and the county could use that energy, purchase that energy, or anyone could purchase the energy, and that money would be used to maintain the bridge. So if we do this, we would save $35 million off the top because that's the demolition cost. The value of this public asset is around $300 million. It could be more, but we don't want to demolish $300 million asset and spend $35 million when we can do something better with the bridge. I mentioned we would sell the kilowatt currency. We would put charging stations on the bridge. It would increase our green footprint. It would decrease our carbon footprint. It would increase Tampa Bay resilience. It would increase sustainability. It would we would act as the catch-all for pollution from the bay and the other bridges. We'd be a test bed for clean energy. Are there any questions?
Does anyone have any questions for Neil? Hearing none.
Have you?
300.
I have a question. Have you? What's been the response from the Florida Department of Transportation? Have you had a chance to talk to them?
Yes, they're neutral. They're not particularly interested in innovative. I don't know if anyone's here from that, but that's not their mission. Their mission is to do their job, and they don't see this as, I think, as their mission. But we were up against the same issue with the Gandy Bridge. The problem with the Gandy Bridge was because we didn't have the funds to maintain the bridge. But in this case, we have a perfectly good bridge. It's good for 40-ton trucks, dynamic load the day it closes. And if you only put a solar array on it and people on the bridge will last for a very, very, very long time. So I hope that answers that question. Are there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay.
Tina, is there anyone else?
Yes, Madam Chair, Mike Reardon also wishes to address the board today. Thank you. Mr. Reardon, you have 3 minutes as well.
New policy that the jarheads grunts go before the classy officers with good news, so I could be out of the room.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here to talk, no. I'm here to talk about Drew Street. A speed study done in November of last year by the city of Clearwater. You can see this speed study presented in the city council work session on Valentine's Day, the 14th, agenda item 4.6, and then on Thursday, whatever it was, the 17th, I think it's 11.1. But Drew Street's problem's been solved because the Clearwater City Council, what was orchestrated, and their city engineer, and they brought Chief Slaughter in on a Monday morning, and 95% of the cars are compliant with the speed limit because they use the creep method. If the speed limit is 40 and you're going 50, you're compliant. You have to see it to believe it. Watch the video. So they had a speed study, and I'm not sure why they had a speed study presenting 95% compliance, talking about the resolution letter they were sending to FDOT, which told me they are going to lower the speed limit. Hopefully it's the whole section, 1.8 miles. I'm not sure if it's the whole section to 35. And they're lowering the speed limit to 35 for safety reasons, because no speed study in the world is going to get you down to the 85th percentile, or to lower the speed limit, the formula they use. We already knew that. I have a copy of the FDOT speed study recently done, and it also doesn't show you could bring the speed limit down based on the statute. But the speed limit is coming down 5 miles an hour on that stretch, at least from Highland to where it turns into 35 down by MLK, hopefully from Jupiter to Highland. But you have to watch this presentation. This is an orchestrated, Mayor Hibbard has Omar Atala, the traffic engineer, took Bertel's place, comes up, reads all this stuff, has the chief of police come up on a Monday morning. You ask him, are people obeying the speed limit? He goes, some are. 95%, because they use the creep method. I have found nobody who recognizes the creep method, especially in a residential area. Cars are going down here. I have the copy of the speed study. There's cars doing 96 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour down that stretch. And then they include the cars that are coming to a stop almost because a person's making a left turn in their driveway or a right turn into a neighborhood. So they're including the cars doing 9 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour in the speed study. If anybody wants it, call me 727-639-4264 and I'll send you a copy. I got it from public records. So every single time the City of Clearwater Council starts their little playing around trying to kill the streetscape, which they have no authority over, because remember, Imagine Clearwater, if it opens on time, will open 6 months to a year before the streetscape construction starts on Drew Street. I will be here to tell you the games they're playing, but I will go before the classy colonels or officers. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mike. Tina, is there anyone else at this time?
No, Madam Chair, that's all.
Thank you, Tina. We'll move on to recognitions and announcements, and I'm going to turn this over to Whit, our Executive Director.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I'd like to invite Nusheen Rahman to come up to the podium. We are delighted to announce that we have promoted her to a position of planner, and she has just demonstrated a great deal of professionalism, competence. She's taken things and run with them and has shown a lot of leadership within the organization, and I think you see that. Hopefully you see that with the land use cases that she presents to you almost every month. This month she gets a break. But congratulations, we're really proud of you and look forward to having you here for a very long time.
Thank you so much, Whit, and it is refreshing to be up here for a reason other than presenting land use cases. I'm sure you all feel the same. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Rodney and Whit and the agency for all the support that they provided. And I started here 2 years ago, and that was actually my first position as a planner. So Forward Pinellas is really where I've started my planning career, and I'm really looking forward to the contributions I can make moving forward. And I'm really proud of the work that we do as an agency. So thank you all.
Nusheen, it's really refreshing to have you up here because you actually make it simple and easy for everyone to understand. So I really appreciate you as a planner, and I'm so glad that you got a promotion. Thank you. Thank you. Agenda item number 5 is the consent agenda, and do any board members wish to pull any items from the consent agenda to be handled individually at this time? Yes, sir.
Whit, on the, looking at our Citizens Advisory Committee membership list, do we have applications that are filling the pipeline, or are we having problems getting folks on the, it looks like there's a lot of vacancies, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think the return to in-person meetings required a little extra effort on our part because we've seen some drop off in committee meetings since the emergency order expired, which allowed people to participate fully remotely. We are still looking for some additional Citizens Advisory Committee members from North Pinellas County. And Amy and I have a little bit of a strategy to find some of those folks through social media and other mechanisms. But that's probably where we need the most assistance is people who are north of Ulmerton Road, really anywhere.
It looks like there's a couple on the beaches, a couple in St. Petersburg, and then a lot of at-large.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess you're right, that could be anywhere. But
that could be from anywhere,
yeah.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. That's
sure.
all. That's my only question, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anyone else at this time? Hearing none. Tina, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this the consent agenda?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Thank you. And at this time, we need a motion and a second. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Tina, did you get the first and the second?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for checking.
Okay, thank you. Presentations and/or action items. We'll start with 6A, PSTA Activity Report. Councilmember Driscoll.
Thank you. The PSTA Board met last on February 23rd. Regarding sustainability, we're moving forward with renewable energy plans to support our electric bus fleet and have been engaging with Duke Energy to consider renewable energy sources and installations on our campus at PSTA. The PSTA Board also received an update on our sustainable strategic plan, which was finalized last year in March. Ava, our autonomous vehicle advantage shuttle, began her tour of Clearwater Beach in late February and will be visiting until the end of March. She will then begin service in Dunedin in mid-April. The PSTA Spring Break Service promotion is back. It's a partnership with the City of Clearwater, offering free rides for which begin on March 1st, and allows beachgoers to park at several lots in downtown Clearwater and get a free ride to and from the beach. The first week of the promotion was fantastic, and we look forward to seeing many of you on the trolley on your way to the beach. The service, that promotion will continue 7 days a week until the end of April. Our next board meeting will be held on March 30th, 2022 at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Driscoll. Any questions for the council person? Anyone for Councilmember Driscoll? Okay, we'll move on to 6B. T. Barta and Witt is going to give the report for us today.
Commissioner Long may be here a little bit later. She has a conflict in the early part of our meeting. Just a quick update, T. Barta is having a meeting this Friday prior to the TMA Leadership Group meeting at FDOT headquarters. They've had difficulty getting a quorum lately, so they have a number of business items that they need to move. So their thinking is that they'll have a quorum, since a lot of those members will be also at the TMA Leadership Group meeting. They will be also talking about the 41-mile proposed bus rapid transit project between Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas County. There has been some news reporting on the conflict inherent in that plan, in that they're sort of banking on the additional lanes north of the downtown interchange in Hillsborough County, and the Hillsborough MPO is currently opposed to additional lanes on I-275 north of the downtown interchange. So there's a little bit of a conflict with that. The T-BARTA staff has reached out to us to see if our board would like a presentation on that concept of operations for that regional proposed transit project, and I don't think this board has heard much about that in a few years. So I thought it might be helpful, perhaps later this year when we have a relatively light agenda, to see if T-BARTA would come and cover the different characteristics of that project and the operating plan. We know we don't have a full agreement, but it has gone all the way through the PD&E process, and parts of that are dependent on the I-275 reconstruction, the Howard Franklin reconstruction, and it seems fairly timely. So unless the board would not like to hear that, we'll try to accommodate them in the next several months. Okay, that's my report then.
Any questions for Witt?
Do you have anything you wanted to add?
6C is the Unified Planning Work Program draft, and Chelsea will do a presentation. Hi, Chelsea.
All right, so good afternoon, board. I'm going to be presenting on what we call the Unified Planning Work Program, or the UPWP. The UPWP is required by federal and state law, and it really documents the transportation planning funding that our agency receives. As you're all aware, Ford Pinellas is tasked with both land use and transportation. We do have two separate kind of funding sources for those activities, and my presentation is just going to cover the transportation side of things. Rodney's going to speak after me and cover the land use side of our budgeting. So we're required to adopt this every 2 years to really prove to the state and federal government how we're spending the funding that they're providing to us. The current one was adopted in May in 2020 and goes until June 30th of this year. So the planning activities I'm going to highlight for you today are all the things that we anticipate doing starting July 1st, going through June 30th of 2024. This is just a high-level schedule. We brought a draft to the committees last month to kind of give them a heads up on the different activities that we plan to undertake. We're bringing it to you right now, but over the next couple of months, we're going to be working with our state and federal review agencies to really go through the UPWP and make sure everything looks fine. I know that there were a couple of typos that were on the board listing page, and there's some other little cleanup things that we need to do, including finalizing our numbers. So we'll bring back a final to you for adoption in May, transmit it to the state, and it will go into effect on July 1st. This is just a high-level overview of the different MPO grant funding sources. For transportation, we do work on federal grants and through a reimbursement process. Just a little more than half of those grants come from the Federal Highway Administration. There is a small portion, about 25%, that comes from Federal Highway. That's our surface transportation program. Those are predominantly planning funds. And then we do also get funding from the Federal Transit Administration. The UPWP is broken into a series of tasks, and I'm going to walk through each one of those for you. And as staff, whenever we work on anything, if it's 2 hours here or 3 hours there, we do have to show how we're even spending our staff time on each one of these different activities. These are the various tasks. We currently have 10 of them. And this is important because when we go back to the feds, and we say, all right, well, we spent your money here, here, and here, they go right to the UPWP to make sure it's in an area that we told them we were going to be working on. So in total, there is about $5.8 million in our budget for the next 2 years for transportation planning activities. That includes personnel costs, so just our regular internal benefits and salaries. It includes funding for consultants. And you'll see it's a pretty large piece of the bar chart right there. And that's really because we're about to begin developing the next long-range transportation plan, and we do anticipate needing a lot of consultant support for that. It also includes travel and other expenses. And those other expenses are really printing expenses, copiers, things like that. So the first task is our program administration, and it's a pretty sizable piece of that overall pie that you can see. These are our direct expenses that include rent, insurance. We did budget additional funding for some new bike and pedestrian trail counters. As you're aware, we have a number of them up and down the Pinellas Trail right now, but with new trail segments opening, we did identify a need to purchase additional counters in the next 2 years. And we're also going to be looking to purchase some portable trail counters so that we can move them throughout the county at different locations to get accurate trail counts as we need them. This task also includes support to the board and administration, any kind of procurement activities, and also our federal and state certification. Our next task is public participation. This really focuses on our outreach activities, all the work that Amy does for the agency to maintain our website and our social media presence. But in the course of the next 2 years, we also plan to update our public participation plan. Now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, we've identified some opportunities for us to really enhance our public participation, to be able to reach more people more effectively. So we're going to be working on that in the next 12 months, and then also updating our strategic business plan that really guides the direction of our planning activities. Our third task is system monitoring. This is really a lot of the behind the scenes work that you don't necessarily see, but you see all the outputs from. This is our crash data monitoring program where all of the safety data lives, our traffic count program where you see our annual traffic count map come out, and also our level of service database. And this is a database that looks at things like how congested our roadways are. And this really serves as a foundation for a lot of the transportation planning that we do as an agency. Our fourth task is systems planning. This is a little bit of a catch-all. You'll see a very long list of activities that go on there. This covers everything from all of the coordination activities we do with public transportation agencies to active transportation, our Complete Streets Grant program, where we provide $100,000 in planning funds to our local agencies, comes out of this line item. This also includes staff time for waterborne transportation, local government support, and also the management of our transportation disadvantaged program. And that's why you'll see it's a pretty big chunk of the pie. Our fifth task is just the Transportation Improvement Program. That's really the 5-year FDOT work program and all the work that we do internally in order to maintain that program, and also developing our annual lists of priorities, which you all will see in the next couple of months, and then any amendments to the TIP. Our sixth task, this is one of the biggest ones because, again, we are heading into the development of the 2050 Long-Range Transportation Plan. So all of the activities that we'll be undertaking as an agency, including consultant support in the next 2 years, is included in here. This is where we're going to start developing population and employment projections going out to 2050. We'll start identifying revenues covering that time period, assessing all of our transportation needs, and then ultimately developing a cost-feasible transportation plan. Our seventh task is regional activities. This covers any staff time and travel associated with support to the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance and also the TMA Leadership Group, but also WIT's attendance at MPOAC with some of you as board members, and then coordination with TBARDA and other regional partners. We have a special projects task that covers some other things that pop up from time to time, like our spotlight emphasis areas, so implementation of the Gateway Master Plan. We do have a line item in the UPWP that calls out the establishment of, I'm going to screw this up, Whit, what's it called, the breed mobility in the Gateway area? Sorry.
Now you caught me.
Transportation Management Organization, sorry about that.
Yeah, Transportation Management Organization.
I apologize for that. So we do plan to work on that in the next couple of years, and also implementing our Safe Streets Pinellas program. And then our final task is our Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance support and shared activities. This is really just the $5,000 that our agency provides. Each of the MPOs in the region, we all contribute $5,000 for joint planning activities at the regional level, and that's captured in this task. And through that, we're going to be conducting a regional needs assessment that's going to look at transportation needs, mobility, safety, equity, and resilience needs. So today, we are really just asking for any feedback that you may have on the work products that we've identified for the next couple of years on the transportation side again. And then going forward, we will modify the document as needed, finalize the revenues, and bring you back a final version for review and approval in May. And with that, I will take any questions.
Any questions for Chelsea?
I have one thing I'd like to just add.
That's fine.
I'm going to cover it later in my report, but we had, I think, a productive discussion with the Board of County Commissioners last Thursday. And a couple of the comments from the commission members were about what the public thinks about transportation funding and investment. And I just want to point out that the money that we're allocating in this UPWP towards public engagement is significant. And in support of the long-range plan, last time we did this 2 or 3 years ago, we had a very helpful, statistically valid survey of public preferences, and the need for transportation improvements and better transportation funding and more flexible transportation funding was very clearly heard in that. And in fact, you may remember that Chelsea went through an exercise that showed the public told us they want to spend the money this way, but the constraints on the funding sources that we receive mean we're really only able to spend it this way. And we would like to repeat something similar, but just maybe a strong partnership with Pinellas County staff over the next couple of years on really getting the input from the business community, getting the input from residents across the county. That's envisioned here in this UPWP. So I wanted to kind of draw that connection. I think we have good data, and I think we need to just build on the data that we previously had.
Thank you, Whit. Anyone else? Any questions? Tina, is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this
No,
item?
Madam Chair, there is not.
Thank you, Tina. Looking for a motion for the United Planning Work Program to approve the draft. Anyone?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. 6D, Pinellas Planning Council preliminary budget discussion for fiscal year 23. And this presentation will be by our famous Rodney Chapman.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Rodney Chapman, Division Manager here for Pinellas. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I will give the counterpart to Chelsea's remarks regarding the funding and how it's shaping up for the PPC for fiscal year 23. I wanted to let you know that in the time that we've been here, even though these are two distinct processes, we collaborate and integrate in a lot of ways so that the funding that the PPC considers and the funding that the decisions that the PPC and the MPO consider both complement and support one another. So quickly, I'll just talk a little bit about the relationship between the PPC and the MPO because we do have a few new board members. I will then shift to our budget development strategy that we've honed over the last few years. Then talk about a few current and future key projects, give you a snapshot look at the way the numbers are shaping up for fiscal year 23, and then conclude with a few next steps. I'll tell you that the there are a few changes to the timeline this year because there's a new director at OMB, so we've had to push some things up and then move some other things around, but generally the process will follow a similar set of steps as in recent years. So first, in terms of the policy relationship, if you look at the special act, you will see that there's a lot of acknowledgement and emphasis on the fact that Pinellas County is a redevelopment mode, and not only are we redeveloping, but multimodal transportation investments and improvements are critical in helping us maintain a certain quality of life, as well as to help us meet our economic goals. When it comes to the responsibilities of PPC, there are essentially 6 pillars, and that's what that graphic is meant to convey on the right. Our foundation is the administration of the countywide plan. That is through what we talked about earlier with Nasheen, giving you presentations on amendments to the map that were initiated by local governments. We also deal with the strategies part as well as just the rules. We do amend the rules from time to time, and you'll see what we plan to do with a pretty robust package of rule amendments in fiscal year 23. The 3 pillars above that is our suite of technical assistance services that we provide to our local governments. They cover things like general technical assistance. We also provide data analysis, as well as a knowledge exchange series that we created a few years ago, which is a deep dive into a certain planning topic. So our last 2 modules under knowledge exchange have been micromobility, as well as a new way that we will hopefully evaluate the transportation impacts of map amendments. We also serve intergovernmental coordination role, whereby we serve as a clearinghouse and convener or forum for our local government planners. They often are dealing with a set of common challenges, and they come to us to help them figure it out. And often that manifests itself in putting out questions, or when things are more complex, we've actually established subcommittees like we did for self-storage, when we saw a lot of communities dealing with the preponderance of self-storage applications. And then at the top, when we have capacity in terms of staff resources and financial resources, we can take on special projects. So things like the investment corridor transition plan is an example of a more involved special project that our staff undertakes. There's also a fiscal relationship between the PPC and the MPO. Much like your local governments, the PPC has a millage rate, albeit a lot smaller. We are funded through ad valorem taxes, but we also receive revenue from the MPO, and then we also have a small interest-bearing account. The PPC pays the salaries and benefits for all the staff members, and then invoices the MPO for those costs. So essentially, the PPC serves as the float for both those working on transportation and land use. And then that last bullet is meant to convey that we do share certain other types of expenses. There are some expenses that the MPO is not allowed to cover. So things like professional memberships, special events like our legislative workshop we had over the summer aren't things that are eligible MPO costs, so the PPC absorbs those expenses. And then there are some things like rent that we can jointly share, and we do that regularly. We have a 16-member team. They are very talented and dedicated, and you know, as I think you've heard from our staff even today, that we have a high level of morale, and people are very proud of the work we do and the people they work with. We have 2 open positions currently, but what we've seen is there is a bit of a challenge in the labor market. There are sort of new things to consider, and we have found that we have to be mindful of doing things differently in order to attract and retain our workforce. In terms of the strategy that we've honed over the last few years as we develop the budget, it's centered around 4 main themes. One is values and culture. We're trying to make sure that every spending decision we make is based on having a conservative fiscal outlook. We are a dependent special district, so we're sort of on our own, and we also have that relationship to the MPO where we have to provide that, that cash flow in certain instances. So it allows, we have to be conservative about our spending decisions. We've been pretty effective in being recognized as an honest broker. And to that point, I had a conversation this morning with a developer's attorney because she was hearing some things and wanted to know from me what the true situation was. So I think we've been able to serve as that honest broker role here the last few years. I think as you've seen with things like promoting the Sheen, we are a big believer in supporting our staff and helping them grow and develop. And so we craft a budget by providing professional development opportunities and other opportunities for growth so that they want to spend the majority, if not all of their career here with us. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we have the resources necessary to be a communicator, both internally with our staff, but also externally with the public and our stakeholders. You know, Whit often says you can't communicate enough, and I think our budget decisions do reflect that. We also want to make sure that our spending decisions are aligned with our strategic business plan and our vision for Pinellas County. Also, our decisions taking advantage of the existing partnerships and relationships that we have so that we can do more with our partner communities and aligned agencies. And lastly, technology is really changing for the planning profession, and what we found is there's software and other data sets that are out there that allow for us to bridge certain knowledge gaps as well as just make better informed decisions. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the opportunity or the ability to invest in those new technologies. So for fiscal year 22, this is a list of those key projects. You guys have heard a lot about most of these, but I'll just reinforce the fact that we do continue to provide a high level of technical assistance to our local governments. This year we've been asked to actually serve as a planning staff for one of our beach communities, which is something that we hadn't done in the time that I've been here. And that's what we've seen is that for the smaller communities that don't have the staff or the expertise, they often come to us for a project or a particular issue, but in some instances, they're asking for us to almost provide that day-to-day planning services. For fiscal year 23, we will have carryover funds for those first two projects, the Investment Corridor Transition Plan and the Urban Design Services Pilot Program. You did approve the scope and budget for the Investment Corridor earlier on the consent agenda, and for the Urban Design Services Pilot Program, that's taken a little bit longer for the county to execute their part of the agreement, so we think that we will have carryover funds into fiscal year 23 for that project. And then our work on the Countywide Housing Compact is really just our staff time, and that effort will continue into the next fiscal year. What you may not know is all the communities in Pinellas County are moving into the window where the state is mandating that they evaluate their comprehensive plans. And so we've been contacted with 8 communities so far who have asked us to assist them in that state mandated review of their comprehensive plan, and we think we have the staff resources to complete that request. Next year, we also will be working with PSTAs, City of St. Pete and City of South Pasadena on the second phase of the Sunrunner Rising Development Study. You received a presentation on the phase 1 work a couple months ago. Phase 2 is going to be a little bit different in that the work will focus on design guidelines and visualization so that we can be clear with the development community about what type of development that we want to see come out of the ground adjacent to the Sunrunner corridor. As I mentioned before, we do anticipate having a pretty robust amendment package for the countywide rules to reflect current planning effort recommendations, such as the Target Employment Industrial Land Study. We are making some potential changes to how we assess the transportation impacts of future land use map amendments, and we've affectionately called this the Multimodal Accessibility Index. And then we've also been asked to look at a new way of measuring development intensity for residential uses. Instead of using a units per acre approach, we've been asked to look at a floor area ratio, which is more of a form-based approach to that. And then lastly, Pinellas County Economic Development has asked that we help them with the next Economic Development Symposium. And so we anticipate in the summer of 2023 that we will be working with them on that initiative. And I also just highlight that we also plan to continue our fellowship with the University of South Florida's Department of Urban and Regional Planning. This will be our 3rd year of the fellowship, and we found it to be a mutually beneficial relationship because the graduate student gets real-world experience, and we also are able to get a lot of good work out of that person for not a lot of money, quite honestly. So the snapshot for revenues for fiscal year 23, and again, these numbers will change, but we want to come before you and give you a sense of how things are shaping up at this moment. The budget outline that we submitted to OMB a couple of weeks ago maintains the current millage at 0.0150. The guidance from OMB has asked us to budget for a 6.8% increase in property taxes. That results in about $94,000 compared to fiscal year 22. We also are budgeting for more revenue from our local assistance. So those 8 communities that we're going to work with on the comprehensive plan update, that work will be about $20,000. But we had budgeted 5 last year, so it's about 20, so a $15,000 increase. And then, as I mentioned before, there is a carryover for those 2 projects from fiscal year 22 into fiscal year 23. So for the investment quarter transition plan, and then for the urban design services pilot program. And the pie chart to the right gives you that breakdown of the revenue sources, with the beginning fund balance, the interest account, the local assistance dollars, the ad valorem taxes, and the revenue received from the MPO for salaries and benefits. So the expenses are shown here. The operating expenses are projected to decrease by about 18% compared to fiscal year 22. As you may recall, those of you that have been around for a while, there was a directive that the board had asked us to spend down the unassigned fund balance, which was at a healthy level, and we've done that. So that by that spending down of that revenue source, we don't have as many dollars to put on special projects, for example, and so you see that reduction in funds there. One of the other large line items in the expense part of our budget is our intergovernmental service charges. We've talked about that probably the last 2 or 3 budget cycles. And we do have a placeholder number, I'll call it, in the budget right now, but those service charges have not been finalized. And I guess if I'll go and pivot a bit and go back to this previous slide just to draw your attention to something, because when the MPO and the PPC merged, there was a lot of thought that went into it. I was looking at the special act this morning, and it goes back to 2012, and a lot of good, thoughtful work has led us to where we are today. But one of the things that that we've noticed is that there is a structural imbalance in the amount of revenue that the PPC brings in through property taxes and the expenses. So you're looking at, if you look at the orange and the blue, you're looking at $2.7 million or so. So that's your property taxes and MPO charges for services. And again, the interest and the technical assistance dollars are much smaller, but still part of that funding mix. But if you take out that beginning fund balance and look at just our expenses when it comes to salaries and benefits and your operating costs, you're about at $3.3 million. So without that beginning fund balance or that healthy reserve, we don't have the amount of revenue to keep sort of the train rolling and keep doing the good things that we're doing. And that's why, we talked earlier about having a conservative fiscal outlook. That's something that we have recognized that allows for us to continue operating. But at some point in the next, I'll say, few years, we'll have to have a conversation about adjusting the millage rate so that at least we're bringing as much revenue to cover our basic operating expenses. Because right now we aren't doing that, and we haven't done that since in the time I've been here. So lastly, as I told you before, these numbers will change. These are preliminary. We will continue to refine these with the Office of Management and Budget over the next couple of months. We do have a sit down with the county administrator to review our budget in April. We'll follow it up with another discussion with the board and with our board in June. We'll go to the county commission in June as well with a budget information session presentation, and then wrap up the budget development process for fiscal year 23 in July. Any questions?
Rodney, I have a question. When you're talking about the fees to the local communities, you're doing 8 communities. I mean, is there like can you do an increase every once in a while, or even though it's a small amount? I mean, I'm just curious because I feel like it's a lot less than if they had a consultant.
Absolutely, Mayor. Yes, Mayor, it's a great question, and our philosophy has been that we charge, what it costs for our staff time to do the work. So there is no profit, there is no escalation of charges because I think locals come to us for 2 reasons. One, they believe in the competence and expertise of our staff, but secondly, we are much cheaper than the consulting industry. So, and we feel like that's our sweet spot, that's our role, that's what we should do. But, there is that imbalance that I noted, and we're gonna have to find a solution to that. The other thing I wanna say is that technical assistance isn't consistent. So we're doing 8 comprehensive plans next year, but in 2024, maybe only be 1 or 2. So that revenue kind of rises and falls based on the local needs, and it's often hard to predict.
Have the fees already been expressed to the communities, they already know?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And does anyone else have any questions from the board for Rodney on the budget? Yes, Commissioner Edgars.
Yeah, just real quick, Rodney, on the 6.8% increase that you've been given, did they break that down at all in terms of where it's coming from, or how they've established it, or, I mean?
No, they have not. And, I said that these numbers will change. I remember last year we started out at 3.4% at the beginning of that process, and then we ended up at, I believe, 6 or so. But we'll get more information as we go through the process, and I'll inquire with our budget analysts to get an answer to the question.
Like half the properties are Save Our Homes, roughly, so it looks like that's going to go all the way up to 3%, because of the inflation issues. So you're talking still about the other half of the properties going up to average out at 6.8. That's huge.
Yes,
it's a huge
it is.
increase. I wouldn't, I wouldn't necessarily expect that we're going to be able to keep all of that. I mean, it's a year that we have to be careful, right? I mean,
yes, and Whit and I have had discussions about being very conservative this budget year.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have a question for Rodney at this time? Rodney, thank you for the presentation. 6E, Ford Pinellas Equity Assessment Update with Angela. Hi, Angela.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Again, I'm Angela Ryan, and I'm very pleased to discuss the Ford Pinellas Equity Assessment today. And it represents the hard work of several people in our agency and over a year of conducting this internal analysis that consisted of just our internal resources. So today I have a very concise presentation. And first, I want to start off with our why. And just to frame the discussion about, equity analysis here in Pinellas County and why we conducted this work, I think it's really important to first state that this effort is just expanding on our existing responsibilities and our requirements. As you all know, we have federal requirements for environmental justice, by executive order since 1994, ADA, Title VI, et cetera. So what this equity assessment did essentially was conduct an internal audit to take a hard look at ourselves to say, how have we been doing as an agency at meeting these responsibilities that we have to the public? Additionally, due to the fact that we are professional planners, we are also bound by our AICP ethics, which include a special responsibility to plan for social justice. So our why specifically for this assessment was to take a look at these historically excluded communities. And that's comprised of low-income communities as well as racial minority communities here in Pinellas County. And look at those historical practices and the systems and policies that have impacted these communities' abilities for economic success. From that data, again, looking internally at our activities and our impact on the community, to develop a strategic plan to ensure our work here at the countywide level is inclusive and results in equitable outcomes for everyone in the community. And our evaluation parameters were based on essentially a three-pronged process. External analysis, which was just reestablishing our environmental justice areas and terming those as our equity emphasis areas. So that was the area that we were going to be collecting our data, both quantitatively, qualitatively, and experiential data. And then looking at, that particular data set through, not only the lens of census data, but through the practices that have occurred with our agency, our own planning documents, our outreach practices, et cetera. And that's really where the internal analysis comes in. It's like, who are we as Forward Pinellas? What does our staffing look like? What about our committees? What is our process for public engagement and outreach? And how have we been able to embrace diverse communities and expand our stakeholders? And lastly, that experiential analysis, which is so important. That is essentially the lived experiences of people. People that have not had the opportunities to talk with public representatives, to work with our agency on a daily basis. We specifically reached out to these communities to ask them about their lived experiences. How have their lives, for example, been impacted by their ability to get to work, or have they not? So those kind of evaluation parameters are what essentially led us to our findings. And this is extremely high level, but a couple of really important facets that I want to point out in regards to the equity assessment findings are on the left-hand side of the screen. So first, when we looked at our high injury network and where our hotspots are, so essentially where most of the crash is occurring, we found that 70% of these human fatalities and serious injuries were occurring within the equity emphasis area. However, only 32% of the county land mass is comprised of that equity emphasis area. So essentially what we found is there's this major disproportionate impact to these people that reside within equity emphasis area, and that is solely based on where they live. These people are frankly dying at a higher rate based on their neighborhood, of which factors they have no control. And at any rate, when we looked at the additional data, we found, how has our agency worked to allocate resources for these people? We found that we have some programs that have been extremely dedicated to addressing these type of concerns within the county, and other areas that we could use some improvement. So the area that we saw that we could use some improvement was in our transportation improvement program. We found that only about 3.3% of our resources through that program were allocated to improve transportation within the equity emphasis area. In addition to the data analysis, both quantitative and qualitative, we conducted a robust amount of public outreach. We had survey, focus groups. We met with different organizations and different individuals throughout the county to get their feedback on what they need, what would make their lives better, essentially, in regards to the responsibilities of which Forward Pinellas provides throughout the county. And what we heard loud and clear are listed on the bottom right-hand side of the screen here. You can see that people said that they wanted increased opportunities for public transportation, new mobility options, affordable housing, quality employment, access to healthy food, and opportunities for political voice so they could be a part of the process. And again, that's just a high-level summary. And I'm going to go into the equity assessment action items here, and these are based on the findings of equity assessment over the last year and a half. And essentially what we've created is a 4-part equity policy, and these will be internal policies that the agency utilizes during our normal day-to-day operations. And the first one we have here is remove barriers for political voice. Essentially expanding our network of stakeholders, improving access to all people in the decision making. And that, of course, is through the agency's public participatory planning processes. But the difference here is being very specific about identifying opportunities for people that speak different languages or have different racial makeups to be part of the process. So ideas that we have here are concepts such as a committee composition, expanding our existing agency committees' diversity. And then, as we all know, we have the board reapportionment that will be aligned with this new census data. We have the opportunity, for example, for 25 seats. Is there a equitable representation on the board? That will be certainly something that is required, but we'll be able to look at that through an equity lens. And lastly, the last bullet here, expand opportunities for public engagement. And we have such an incredible staff at Forward Pinellas. I just have to say, I'm just always honored to work with this incredible team. And the outreach that we do is so meaningful. And essentially, what we're providing here is just targeted outreach and communication within our equity emphasis area to allow for all people to participate in the planning process.
Before you, Angela, I want to interrupt you just 1 second on that last thing. I think that's a powerful statement. People like me don't have time to be involved in the political process, and that is by design. And I will tell you, that's exactly even myself when I started, 20 years ago, a young entrepreneur trying to make a living, raising children. You don't have time. And so how do we, as a group, figure a way to get people to be able to get into the political process and be a part of what we're doing, but also not take away from their job that they, come here. I know myself, and I'm just using myself as an example. When I'm here, I'm not making any money. And in my city, I get paid more than anybody, which is $600 a month. So does that $600 compensate for all the time that I'm on all these different agencies? And believe me, I'm not being a whiner. I want to participate, but.
Cookie, the answer is no, it doesn't.
And that's what I'm saying. So, here we are, we're doing this, but where do we go from here? How do we, Dave, what can we do?
You don't have meetings at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. This is not, honestly, it's not, we do public hearings at the county and we don't do them until 6 o'clock. And not that that's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but so if you have a particular piece of property that's being considered for change, folks in theory are at home, but not necessarily. They've come home from a long day of work, they're getting dinner ready, they're getting homework, and everybody's doing their thing. So whether it's an equity issue by race or ethnicity or just busy people, it's hard to get folks engaged. And so if you do it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it makes it nearly impossible. So if you're talking about ways to have access, it's having evening meetings. Not that I'm excited about that, mind you. However, you're talking about access and people getting a hold of it or showing, if you try to get people engaged in this to listen to us live is one thing, but even if you tell them, well, you can go online later and watch it on your own, it's like,
Who wants to do that?
and you're not
It's ridiculous.
engaged really because there's no feedback potential at that time. You're just listening. So it's really, I don't know how we would do it from a meeting standpoint.
Michael, how do you do it? You are a librarian, it's a full-time job, correct? And so that you are able to do it because it is part-time. Is that?
To a point, yes.
Okay.
I was full-time and I stepped down to part-time so I can do this. But honestly, I wouldn't be able to do this if I didn't have a partner.
Exactly,
and that's
somebody that was compensating.
who offset me.
And you too?
Same with me.
Yeah.
When I was working full-time when I first got elected.
Anybody else want to add to that at all? You can work around it, obviously, Brandy, because you're in real estate, but it's still.
It still dramatically impacts.
Right.
Because your availability.
Yeah.
But then add a layer on top of that of having children.
Right.
I have an 11-year-old for many years until this year. I was the only person on our council that had young children.
Sorry, I was getting on people for the mic earlier, now it's me. But yeah, if you were talking about, the various levels of diversity. If we want young people involved with young families, that makes things even more challenging. And there's a lot of intellect out there that we would love to draw from, but they just don't have the bandwidth to give it.
I have a quick question. I'm new here. That's my newest statement. But and running businesses and doing what we do, I can kind of move things around. And I have, my husband who does a lot of stuff. But we make our meetings according to us, not to the people who we want to draw, more or less. We make them to what fits our schedule, right? We're here during the day. But would we be able to, and I know this goes into the whole side of the virtual stuff, but would you be able to have meetings for in the evening that would powerhouse to come to us if we did it during the day? I mean, I would go wherever we needed to do, but maybe
Some couldn't. And
something,
then they could
even
do
if
it
it
on
was a
TV.
virtual meeting, because they're giving us information, right? They're doing with the committees and so forth. Even if you were allow them to say, hey, I don't have a babysitter, but I'm going to sit at the kitchen table and I'm going to be virtual with you. And that would give you information that you would bring back to us instead of making it so hard for them to have to come somewhere if they don't have a babysitter, if they don't have a significant other that can help them. Think of ways in this day of technology that we could bring them, make it easy on them.
Karen, I think you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to share a brief story. When I first was elected to the Clearwater City Commission, I had young children, and I needed an extra half an hour to get them to school in the morning. So I asked my fellow city commissioners, I said, could we start our meeting a half an hour later? And they all said no. And it was just like that half an hour was, then I had to find somebody who could babysit for that half hour. And you're right. Now, the other issue is in Tallahassee, they're restricting our ability to meet virtually. And that's, you know, I agree with you. We should be using technology so that we can have more outreach and have more input. And I do think that's the one positive thing that's happened at the county commission is, you know, people can Zoom in under citizens to be heard or on any agenda item. However, that being said, that can be daunting for people as well, because suddenly, you know, we've got to figure out, I think, a better way of letting people know the order in which they're going to speak, because all of a sudden you call somebody and they're like, whoa, you know, I'm on. And so I just think this would be something that would be, that we all should give a lot more thought as to how we can bring people together and get the information. The final thing that I would say is acronyms. It is so difficult to understand what we do.
It sure is.
Take it from the new person, I
Somehow
said.
we need to make it friendly. And then I'll say one more thing was through junior achievement, they had, for many years, I went to third grade classes and taught about planning and zoning. And this was before you were here, Whit, but I couldn't get the MPO staff to the MPO executive director to agree to let staff go out and teach some of these classes. And it was just a one-day thing. And it was so valuable because we literally taught them how to plan and zone. You know, we had a grid and we said, you know, where would you put a house and a park and all kinds of things. And they got it and they were excited. So when you talk about trying to reach the 6 to 12-year-old, that would be a perfect program to do.
We were in the executive committee the other day, we were kind of talking about some different things, and I will bring it up later, but one of the things that I would like to see, because this is my last year and on the board, was we were talking about having a meeting with all of us to kind of talk about, you know, as we move forward, our hopes for Forward Pinellas and some of the things, and maybe this could be one of the things that we bring up in that meeting is, you know, how do we get more people, whether they're young or whatever age, to be involved. We had a really contentious meeting last night, and a young girl, she couldn't have been, I don't even think she was 20 years old. She was probably spoke the most eloquently of anyone last night, and I thought, this young lady, I don't know who you are, but you know, you need to be involved, because she was just wonderful in the way that she you know, articulated what was the subject last night. So we'll talk a little bit about that later, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought that was powerful and something that we should talk about while we were here. So Angela, you can proceed.
Just one more. Can I just add one more thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just following up a little bit on what Commissioner Seal said. So it's one thing to have access to folks, you know, to do things that make us more accessible. But if they don't understand exactly what it is that we're doing, and it's, and no insult to planners, or sometimes when we're in that strategic thinking mode, but that doesn't translate. So if we're trying to connect with people to let them know, why would you be interested in sitting in on this meeting? I mean, it's like, well, we got a long-term strategic plan, and it's like, well, that's 2050. We're talking about what are we doing today. So that there was a gentleman here earlier that comes frequently and talks about Drew Street. I mean, he puts it right on there. We're talking about Drew Street, and there's people that live on Drew Street. So we're giving him an example where we're really listening to the complaints that you have on your street in your community. And that's what this group does, among many things. But I think we have to figure out a better way to connect. We've always tried to figure out how do we get folks more involved. And well, along came a pandemic, and people started seeing what county commissioners do, and they really perked up. Like, that's what you're responsible for. And we've had more engagement, for better or for worse. Sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, be careful what you ask for. But truly, people have started to see what we do. And it's for them, or maybe they against them in some cases. But they really, I think so some of that we're gonna have to do more of. I think really educating people on what we do on a practical level. Otherwise, even if we're accessible at 7 o'clock at night, you know.
Richard, you want to say anything? Just because we're a school teacher, I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, of course, I think everybody here probably does have thoughts. I mean, I can say for sure I couldn't do this job if I didn't have a partner, and we're fortunate in St. Petersburg to have a decent salary.
Right.
But yeah, with the cost of living what it is, if I was not married and without children, I couldn't afford to do this. Not to mention just what it takes to run for office. I was lucky that I was on leave from work whenever I decided to run for office. And so had that not been the case, it never would have happened for me. It's a lot of work to even get here in the first place. And so, and then that doesn't even mention, like, you know, I've foregone like career advancement to be able to do this. And I'll say that I'm a very privileged person, like, to be able to have the things that I have in the first place anyway. And so that doesn't even speak to a lot of people who have less. So it's tricky, yeah.
Well, I think this was a conversation that we'll continue maybe in that meeting that we have. Yes.
So thinking, you know, because we're not going to ever go back to work like we've done before. That's just kind of the way it is. I had the opportunity to work from home for the past 8 years of my working career. And I have to say that, you know, large businesses are becoming more and more where they want to support the communities and things. So we might want to think about how we can get our word out about what we do. And I mean, a lot of businesses, I've worked for large businesses, will give you time off for community, you know, membership, doing things for the community. And so maybe we can look into something like that where we're talking to businesses and seeing if we can get the community involvement from the businesses, and they actually give them time off to do that. So that's one thought, especially if you're working from home. You can arrange your schedule and, you know, you can go to a meeting.
A lot of good ideas. Well, we're gonna have this discussion if we have our meeting later down the road. Okay, Angela, I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I think it was important, so.
Chair, thank you. I think that was a great discussion, and I really appreciate everybody's remarks and you sharing your lived experience. And it's something that I definitely heard from everyone is, you know, how do we meet people where they're at? How do you get people engaged that don't have internet access? I have to say I've personally been a government employee for a very long time. How do you engage people that have a distrust of the government? Mm-hmm. You know, those are all very difficult questions, and much of our data that we've conducted in regards to the outreach, as well as our listening sessions with the public and equity experts, we asked those exact answers, those questions, and got answers. So based on the feedback that we received from the public, we put together these 4 policies. And I just have some strategy examples here, but this is in no way is complete picture of the entire plan that we have moving forward. And essentially, the plan plan is three-part. It's near-term, mid-term, and long-term. But what's really important about the mid-term and long-term, I'm not going to skip ahead by going through this, but it's this concept of continual monitoring. And that's something that we all have to be engaged to do. And that really feeds into this next policy, which if you can see on the screen here, it says, develop long-term relationships which move at the speed of trust. And essentially, that's going to take time. So the answers to the questions that we have today that we ask of ourselves are going to take some time, and they're going to require transformational processes, not transactional. So we've been working with the public quite successfully, asking them about a specific project. Now we need to ask them about their lives and to be part of our process. And that's what's going to be transformative. It's time consuming, but it's well worth it. And that is essentially the outcome of this equity assessment. And policy 2 here supports that concept, which is that local organization collaboration. And so well put already was that concept of the public-private participation processes, is that those relationships certainly can go a long way. And here we have the objective is this grassroots efforts, and that's essentially expanding our stakeholders and partnering, cross-jurisdictional, cross-sector, partnering with different entities throughout the entire county, throughout the entire Tampa Bay area to achieve social equity. Essentially, that's need-based, because that's what we found from the equity assessment. We have a need. We have to address it. And the strategy examples here are concepts that are already indicated, but establishing these long-term relationships. We already have a new relationship with SPC and a multitude of new stakeholders that they are now part of our process, but we have to maintain those relationships. Also, what we heard loud and clear from the public was this dire concern regarding housing, affordable housing. And we have a lot of wonderful staff here on our PP side of the house, PPC, that have this opportunity to promote affordable housing through various educational and partnership efforts, all of which are listed here on the screen. And equity policy 3 is increase access to opportunity. Essentially, how do we connect people to jobs? How do we connect people to education, to healthcare? Because right now, the system, how it's set up across the nation, this is nothing unique for Pinellas County, it is currently inequitable. People do not have equal options and access to education. And something that we heard that was really important that's on the screen here, it is not lack of aptitude, it is lack of opportunity, which holds people here back. So that's what we want to do. We have incredible opportunities to utilize the technology such as GIS to conduct assessments, such as an access to opportunity assessment that provides the data where people are residing currently and where employment areas are, and then working to fill those gaps. Other specific strategies that we will be implementing include, increasing our target and increased monitoring for equitable funding in programs such as the Long Range Transportation Plan. We have a concept for a safety funding program that would have an equity lens, essentially that would provide additional outreach and education within our equity emphasis area. Also, something incredibly important is healthy food access. And as Forward Panelist is directly aligned with, aligning people with their food resources, we can do that through our partnerships. We can do that through creating new opportunities, such as expanding healthy food access in our grant programs, such as the Complete Streets Grant program. And there's just a multitude of opportunities for us here, not listed on the screen, but essentially to provide equitable transportation options and land use decisions which align where people live with their opportunities to gain valuable education and employment. And equity policy 4 is to strengthen awareness and agency accountability. We all know that an organization's biggest strength are its people. So who we are here at Forward Panelist, and strengthening our own awareness, our own conversations. Just as the chair had indicated, how are we going to fill this need? How are we going to connect with these people? And we can do that through operating with an equity lens. And we can utilize strategies such as building community awareness with story maps, which have been conducted at other agencies like ours throughout the nation that are an educational platform. equity-based data tools for community engagement, and those are things such as an equity matrix that we would utilize for scoring projects, equity-based dashboard and web page, so we have transparency in our decisions as well as transparency in regards to the disparities that exist within Pinellas County. And that last part is the internal awareness, and that's updating our own processes and continually to evolve ourselves as staff at Forward Pinellas to have an equity focus in the work that we do. And our next steps here include the presentation today. Thank you all for your time. Next, we will be implementing our equity assessment action plans, finalizing the report that accompanies that, and then monitoring those actions through time to evaluate their effectiveness and ensure accountability. And through time, these equity policies and strategies that we've developed will certainly evolve, as they should, because we're going to develop these new relationships, these new partnerships, and try new strategies to address the needs that we have here in Pinellas County that have for so long gone unmet. Thank you so much for your time. Questions?
Any questions for Angela? Tina, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak?
Yes, Madam Chair. Nick Colonna from Pinellas Park would like to speak.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Nick Colonna, Planning Development Services Director with City of Pinellas Park. How you doing? This was a great conversation. How's it going with? And I wanted to add something that Angela actually did, but I'm just gonna, since I've put my name in to speak, I'll say something. It is the hardest thing to do as a planner is to get your community out. It really is, and you're experiencing that, to engage. If we have 5 people at a meeting or 10 people at a meeting and half of its staff, we're actually happy some days, which is not the way you want to do it. When I was out working, started out way back when in Denver, Colorado, and I worked in San Antonio, Texas. One thing we did, and Commissioner Steele hit it a bit, we worked with the middle schools and high schools in trying to change mentally and culturally what planning and what government and civics was about. We did a thing back in the 90s called, you probably remember this, Box City, which is literally teaching about planning and civics and learning how to build your community and build it up. And it worked well. I think a group like this, Forward Pinellas, is a great opportunity to kind of reinvent a more modern version of that. And I know there's a few of us planners out there, including myself, that will spend some time to help. The other thing too is public art. Public art is a great tool to engage people. And it's not having public art for the sake of having public art, a medium of sculpture or a painting or whatever it is look at our infrastructure and have the infrastructure we put in to improve our communities, our neighborhoods, identify that. That is another rallying call for that. So something to think about as we do this. This is a great team here. I've worked with everyone here the last couple of years, and I just wanted to add that. It's a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Tina, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak?
No, ma'am.
Angela, I just had to add this. When you were talking about how citizens are distrustful of government, in this meeting that we had last night, where our building holds 187 people, and they were 3 deep all the way up to as far as we would let them come on each side. And when you're in mass or in a pew and you have to stand because there isn't any room, okay, the whole place was packed. They were even outside the door. And when you were talking about the mistrustful piece, they were definitely not happy and not trustful of government. And it was that kind of a group that was in there, the majority of them, or a large portion of them. And I didn't have my shepherd with me, Luna, because she seems to be an icebreaker, but I walked around and in and out of every single person there and hugged them. And, I figured shook hands with whoever. And only one person said something smart to me, and of course then I had to be smart back, but that's who I am. But, my point being is, it's almost like you have to give the love no matter what to show that, there are some of us that are around that are not like that. And that was an experience. My father, who I always tell everybody taught government. I was born into an activist family. And I said, I told everyone he would have loved this, regardless of sides, because, at the end of the day, we're going to try to come together, the bad, the good, the ugly, the beautiful, and try to make changes and make, make our county and our cities a better place. So it was an interesting experience, and I really, really appreciate you, Angela, with everything that you said today, and I think the rest of the board does too, so thank you.
Thank you. We have a great team here, and I just have to commend all the wonderful work they've done. Thank you, Chair.
We're going to have an action item on this, so we need a motion. Move approval. Okay, and is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Item 6F, Waterborne Transportation Committee, and Christina, are you going to come up and do the presentation, please?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Christina Mendoza, and I'm a principal planner with Forward Pinellas. As many of you may be aware, I know we have a lot of new faces among us. Back in January of 2020, the Forward Pinellas board voted to create a waterborne transportation committee that was tasked with looking at various waterborne issues and opportunities within Pinellas County. So we've been working with this committee for the past 2 years to develop a set of recommendations that we're here to present to you today. But before I get to that, I did want to just provide a little context on the committee in case not everybody is aware of what we've been doing. The committee was created with the goal to support the success and expansion of the waterborne transportation system within Pinellas County. The purpose was to discuss the role of the public sector in providing continuing support for the development, operation, and monitoring and reporting of waterborne transportation services. So the committee convened back in October of 2020, and since then, we've worked on reviewing existing and future waterborne service. We've identified a system plan vision for waterborne transportation within the county and regionally, and we've developed cost estimates and a ridership forecast for each of the routes identified in the system plan. We developed a restart of service plan for the Clearwater and Dunedin existing waterborne service. We've worked with the committee to develop a draft countywide waterborne policy that will help us to prioritize route phasing and prioritization moving forward. We've also developed a revised section of the 2045 Advantage Pinellas Long Range Transportation Plan. And essentially that section just expands on what's already included in the long range plan right now. We've also worked to develop recommendations to the Forward Pinellas board. So as I just mentioned, we developed a draft revised section of the Advantage Pinellas Long Range Transportation Plan. So as we were working with the committee, the staff identified a need to kind of expand on the waterborne section that's already in the plan. While it is addressed, we felt that the section needed to be expanded on to really provide an emphasis on the importance of waterborne transportation to the countywide network. So the full section can be found in your meeting materials, but essentially it provides an overview of the existing waterborne routes within the county. It outlines the importance of waterborne transportation service to the county and local governments. It includes a system plan for waterborne service that includes existing and future unfunded needs, as well as aids in prioritizing funding for future service. And it also provides an overview of the Waterborne Transportation Committee charge and purpose and some of the key actions that the committee has been involved with. So currently, this existing section exists in the resiliency section of the plan, but we're actually proposing moving it to the mobility and accessibility section of the plan to really emphasize the connection between waterborne transportation and creating an integrated transportation network. So here is the system plan map that the committee has been working with staff to develop. Essentially, it reflects the existing and proposed routes for waterborne transportation that the committee envisions as a future for the service within the county and regionally. So this provides an overview of the routes. For each of the routes in the system plan, we've developed cost estimates and a ridership forecast, just very high level for us to predict potential demand and determine if the routes are feasible. And using that information, we were able to develop a restart of service plan for the Clearwater and Dunedin existing service. And we're also going to be using that information to help us with phasing the routes moving forward, and that will help us coordinate with the countywide waterborne policy. So now I'm going to just provide a brief overview of the Countywide Waterborne Policy Framework. So just for a little context, staff and committee members were given guidance that there was a need to create develop a way to prioritize waterborne routes for potential funding opportunities. So we developed this policy to establish clear criteria for the continued expansion, operations, and maintenance of waterborne transportation options within Pinellas County so that we can continue to support the needs of our residents, visitors, and businesses. So in the policy, it was really important for us to outline the importance of waterborne transportation to the county as a key economic driver. The policy aims to establish clear criteria for the continued phasing and expansion of waterborne transportation options. So we've included in it a scoring matrix that we use to prioritize the routes. And the criteria include whether or not the service contributes to local redevelopment efforts, whether it contributes to congestion reduction, whether it's close to transit, has bike ped infrastructure, is near major attractors, and whether there's a county and/or local government match of funds. So based on those criteria, we ran the scoring scenario for all of the routes within Pinellas County, and these were the highest scoring stops. So Clearwater, Dunedin, Cross Bay, St. Pete Beach, Treasure Island, and Johns Pass. So that really helps us to build the case for the restart of service plan, which is restarting existing service within Clearwater and Dunedin. It also helps to build the case for phase 2, which we're looking at expanding service to Madeira Beach and Indian Rocks Beach. So a big component of the policy was also including a reporting and evaluation component. This helped us to establish a series of reporting and evaluation metrics to determine the effectiveness of the funded waterborne service over time. So we created a set of mechanisms that we'll be using to evaluate service, and they include whether the project is implemented within 3 years of being funded. We would have to do an annual ridership survey for the first 3 years and then as needed. We'd do an effectiveness assessment, and we would provide a subsidy profile annually by Forward Pinellas and Psta. So now I'm going to provide just an overview of the waterborne restart plan and phasing process. So we've been working with Psta to identify a set of transit priorities and phase them. And within the priorities for phase 1, we've identified the incorporation of the Clearwater and Dunedin restart plan, which has a total cost of about $1.89 million over it's about 3 years, with an operating of $1.79 million and a capital of about $100,000. So this project would provide support for ferry service, which would begin with the restart of Clearwater and Dunedin in fiscal year 23. So the other priority that we've included in phase 1 is the Cross Bay ferry service. So this cost share for Pinellas County and St. Pete is about $2.59 million for operating, and that's over 5 years. And the projects provide support for the Cross Bay Ferry to continue to operate between downtown St. Petersburg and downtown Tampa. And then the transit priorities phase 2 includes waterborne service system expansion to Madeira Beach and to Indian Rocks Beach. The total project cost is about $10.9 million. The operating is $7.36 million over 5 years, and then there would be a capital one-time cost of about $3.6 million. So this would include a capital investment in vessels and 4-day-per-week low-frequency service. It would provide service to it would purchase additional vessels and increase span for service beginning in fiscal year 24, as well as Madeira Beach intercoastal service to IRB Indian Rocks Beach in fiscal year 25. So now I'm just going to provide an overview of the proposed recommendations from the Waterborne Transportation Committee to the Forward Pinellas Board. So the full recommendations can be found in your agenda packets, but they've been summarized on the slides. So the first one has to do with the LRTP Waterborne section. The committee recommends the Forward Pinellas Board amend the Advantage Pinellas 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan to include the Waterborne Transportation System Plan and expanded section on waterborne transportation. So this new section would aid in setting priorities for waterborne projects moving forward. The second recommendation pertains to adopting the countywide waterborne policy. The committee recommends the Forward Pinellas Board adopt the countywide policy for waterborne transportation. This policy aims to establish clear criteria for the prioritization of service within Pinellas County. Given the nature of eligible grant funds and for Waterborne efforts, it's essential that county and/or local government funds are contributed. Strategies for determining eligible expenditures, phasing, and evaluation of services are included in the policy. Here, the committee recommends the establishment of a sustainable phasing strategy that uses grants to support waterborne service development and expansion. The phasing strategy will require local operating commitments and a match for capital grants, which is a condition for expanding service. Determination of feasibility will be based on funding availability and a multi-year commitment, operational and infrastructure cost estimates, ridership forecasts for the proposed routes identified in the system plan, and identification of funding would be facilitated by continued coordination with federal, state, regional, and local government partners. So here the committee recommends that the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority serve as the administrative and contracting entity for waterborne transportation service within Pinellas County. PSTA is an eligible recipient of federal, state, and local funds, and therefore the agency can contract with one or more private operators for service delivery. Regional waterborne transportation services that connect Pinellas County to other jurisdictions may be administered by other entities. And here the committee recommends the Pinellas staff engage in continued monitoring and reporting of waterborne transportation services and their cost effectiveness. The committee will continue to play a key role in supporting existing and future service coordination and will be convened as necessary to review findings and next steps. So the goal is to create an integrated transportation network that provides quick, accessible, and reliable service to the entire county. So this presentation is an action item. We request that the Forward Pinellas Board make a motion to adopt the waterborne recommendations, the LRTP section, and the waterborne policy. The committee will continue to meet quarterly to monitor and evaluate service success and phasing. With that, I will take any questions.
You're up, Cookie. Does anyone have any questions for Christina? Karen.
So going back to the one slide where you did the criteria and the highest scoring waterborne stops, yes. That's something that you did internally?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, it seems to me that some of the other locations might match what Clearwater has, so I don't understand where the difference came into play.
So essentially what we did was, I believe it was a GIS analysis, right, Jared? He actually did the work. He essentially—
Jared, why don't you come up too in case somebody wants, you can add.
Sure. Essentially, it was a GIS analysis that we looked at identification. We identified the locations of key attractors. We identified the location of bike ped infrastructure, transit routes, and essentially we did it was a buffer, right, that you ran?
Yeah, so we did a number of buffer analysis through our GIS system. So we actually had all the proposed stops for everything outlined in the waterborne, or not even just the restart plan, but all the proposed waterborne stops. And we looked at everything from vehicle level of service that's nearby, whether or not these proposed stops are in an activity center, and ran a number of buffers to see where those intersected. And based on those buffers, they got a set of scoring criteria. Which are again outlined in that policy, and these were at least the top performing ones, and then it sort of scaled down from there.
Okay. So. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other maybe comment or question that I might make is, did you look at other operating systems? Because across the United States, there's a lot of private services that have started, and they, don't require government subsidies. So, I mean, that would be my preference, that it be a market-driven service.
For, you're saying a public-private partnership, essentially, for service?
Well,
or just privately, mainly
public-private
privately
partnership
funded?
without the funding assistance, because it's we're now talking major dollars.
I believe PSTA did look at, you did a,
Cassandra, do you want to come up too?
She. She did a case study analysis that looked at all different services, several around the country, I believe. Hi.
God bless. Good afternoon, Cassandra Borchers, Chief Development Officer at Psta. We did look at a number of publicly operated services across the country. So those ferry services that are operated by transit agencies in different scenarios. A lot of them were tourist markets or seasonal tourist markets. So in looking at those, we took a look at how the agency procures and manages a ferry operator. In all cases, it is a private operator, so it's not directly operated by the transit authority, but they bring in somebody who is well seasoned in operating ferry services across the country. In some cases, it's local operators. In some cases, it's like large national companies. The idea of having a private-only ferry operation is certainly workable. Based on the numbers that I've seen, the fares for that kind of service would be astronomical and would be unattainable for most people, and it wouldn't be an equitable service.
I'll add in a little bit. Commissioner, you make a good point. In 2003 or 4, I did the Waterborne feasibility study for the MPO, and the MPO's, the board's sentiment at that time was, this is great, we think the private sector should be responsible for it and do it, and that's what's happened. The Clearwater Ferry stepped in, Hubbard's Marina operated a ferry for a while, but I think what we found from that is that it's not really sustainable without some level of public support, at least in the form of providing dock space, capital infrastructure, assistance with acquisition of vessels. We're recommending that there be some basic level of operating subsidy to keep the fares at a level that are reasonable and it can act as a transportation option. That's one of the criticisms of the Cross Bay Ferry is it's pretty expensive to ride the Cross Bay Ferry. It's not a bus ride. So it's a little needle we're trying to thread is, what is the minimum level of public subsidy that you need to operate it like public transportation? But at the same time, we just don't find it realistic that you can just let private operators go on their own. Now, the Cross Bay Ferry has some promises of over a period of 4 or 5 years that they would then be free of any operating subsidy. But I think that's kind of based on them having a lot more ridership from a daily commuter route between McDill and South Tampa. So there's a lot of moving parts that need to happen. They're also slowly working on getting more tie-ins with for marketing, naming rights, and other advertising. And that their excuse so far has been that those decisions are made a couple of years out. And so they're just laying the groundwork for that. And hopefully by next year they'll have that. But our goal here is to keep any operating subsidy as low as possible and work hard to ensure that most of this is borne by the private operator as much as feasible.
If I could add something to that conversation that we talked about, is that another goal is to connect the ferry service with on-road service. So whether in North County it might be the trolley, in South County it might be the Psta trolley. So because we all know that ferry services, they're not going to run from 7 in the morning to 12 at night. They're going to be more limited in time and scope, even if it is running 7 days a week. But if you can buy one ticket that you can get on the ferry and then you don't have to, it stops at 9 o'clock at night and then you can jump on something else to get back home. And that works the whole way from north to south, that concept. And as a private entity, that would be difficult.
Cliff?
Yeah, I was just trying to wrap my head around, I know we're a peninsula and having boat ferry service has a certain attraction to it. Is the focus of this primarily getting people back and forth to work, to alleviate transportation congestion? Is it also trying to connect together communities for
tourism, and I'm trying to see
All
where
of the
this.
above.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yes.
It's all of it.
Yes.
And so the cost, when you're making an evaluation as to how it is working, obviously the evaluation is different. The metrics are different depending upon if you're looking for overall connectability, trying to, all those things are different. This is a restart. So I guess my first question would be, if it's a restart, it must have stopped for a reason. Okay, so the reason that it stopped.
COVID.
Is it just solely COVID, or was the dollar amounts and the occupancy of the ferries and stuff before COVID, were they high? Was the process
We had a
self-sustaining?
huge high ridership. I probably shouldn't be answering this. I just know. I know that for Dunedin, we had a large ridership, but with COVID, they stopped. I think they came across new issues, though, when you say WIT,
Yeah, I
and
think
didn't restart as fast as maybe they could have.
I think the pandemic was a part of it. The other issue is a lot of deferred maintenance. So they didn't, I don't think they have the financial wherewithal to maintain their fleet for the daily wear and tear that it has of operating it as a public transportation service.
Yeah, well,
So-
ships, operation and maintenance is a critical issue.
As a former boat owner, I know that.
Yes.
Happiest day ever was getting rid of that thing.
Right,
In favor
right.
of a kayak. But yeah, I mean, I think it's deferred maintenance. It's the need to keep the fare low. They really struggled in a couple of cases early, the Clearwater Ferry, with setting that fare. And you may remember in spring break, Clearwater helped them put that fare down to a more reasonable level where it was, I think, $2 each way. And I don't think you did that in Dunedin, so you didn't get the same discount. And there were a lot of construction workers using it. There were a fair amount of restaurant and other hotel workers because the parking on Clearwater Beach is so constrained. So to kind of get at your earlier question, I think it depends on the location of whether it's going to be more heavily visitors, tourists, and maybe a good percentage of workers. It's just going to depend. Johns Pass Village, probably going to be more tourism. Probably same for Treasure Island, but Clearwater Beach, I think there's a pretty decent commuting component that we can tap into.
What's the thought of the frequency of these, focused in the mornings and the evenings, running on an hourly or a couple-hour basis? What's the
I think an
thought, or-
hourly basis would be part of the restart plan. Is that correct?
4-day per week.
For most of it, and then some of it will be a little bit longer, because the trigger point is at what point do you need to get another vessel? So we could spend a lot of money and get a lot of vessels and have a lot more frequency, but that just adds to the cost.
How many vessels are envisioned initially?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
I don't have that off the, do you know, Cassandra, off the top of your head?
Six.
So the vessels that we looked at were price point at 49 passenger vessels, diesel, and they would be about $600,000 a piece, at least when we priced them out a few months ago. Everything can change.
Yeah. So one of those stops, the one between Madeira and Indian Rocks, was like 10 million, which a fairly high dollar amount in like operational costs. Is that because you're envisioning more stops in that area, or is there slips that have to be put in, or what's the reason for that region be so high?
So are you talking about the phase 2 that Christina
Yes.
presented?
Right.
So the phase 1 that she presented is simply using the existing vessels that an operator would have. So that means that the operator would have to come with those vessels. Those would not be owned by PSTA. And so that would be the operation only to restart the service with a 3-vessel fleet. The phase 2 becomes a longer-term investment in the capital operation of the service. So we're expanding the routes, but also the fleet and replacing any existing fleet. And so in that case, we would apply for federal grants in order to acquire that new fleet, and then work with a private operator to operate and maintain that fleet. So the operation that costs that she had mentioned were based on 3 routes as opposed to the, let's see, 4 routes, as opposed to the 2 that have existed in the past in this area. So I don't know if you can go back to the phase 1. So phase 1, 3 years. It's about $600,000 a year to operate service to Clearwater and Dunedin. It's basically hour service to Dunedin and half-hour service between downtown Clearwater and Clearwater Beach. That really needs 2 vessels plus spares, and that spare could also be used for additional spring break service. So that $600,000 is inclusive of any fares collected. I estimated fares to be a little bit less than what they're collecting now because we would be subject to other federal regulations regarding half fare for certain population groups at about $130,000 to $150,000 a year. So if they could collect those fares, because you're dealing with a slightly different tourism market, which generally gets you a higher cost per rider back in the fare box, then that leaves a residual of about $450 a year that would have to come from somewhere to support operations. In the next phase, what the concept here is adding on additional service to Madeira Beach and Indian Rocks Beach. And so these would be new routes, new vessels. The financial exercise says beginning in 2024. That's if you had all the money ready to go in 2023. But it would take time to acquire vessels, then get those vessels commissioned and in operation. And we do that sort of in a stepwise fashion. But having this as an entire phase 2 allows sort of sub-phases to occur as you get those services online. But this is a much bigger system than the restart. The restart system would just get back what we had, right? Because we've lost that for a number of reasons. And it's not so unusual, to the mayor's point, for operators who come into a public transportation market and set a price point that is too low and then realize that they've underpriced their service. And in looking at the financials of the existing operator, that's what I found. I found that they were not spending enough in certain areas, and that's what's put them in the position they're in today, which is a reservation-only service, which is not running on fixed route, which is not a reliable service for workers of any kind.
So again, this particular one this is a lot more. So even though it says system expansion to Madeira and Indian Rocks, that's $7 million is inclusive of not only the area between Madeira and Indian Rocks Beach, which is much smaller, but it's also the entire area.
So this is inclusive of downtown Clearwater to Clearwater Beach to Dunedin, Clearwater Beach to Indian Rocks Beach, and then Madeira Beach to Jungle Prada and connecting sort of that area. So it's not a contiguous system in this phase. There's like 17 phases of this because that's how long it's going to take us to get there. But I'm just kidding. But it's a big, when you look at the map, there's a lot on there, and the restart plan is we've got to start somewhere, right? We keep looking at a big vision map, and that's important, and it's certainly critical in the context of the LRTP, but then you have to start somewhere. And the restart plan allows us to get our sea legs back.
So for the phase 1, the length of time is how long?
Well,
5 years?
Well, we're asking for a 3-year funding commitment, but we would evaluate that service and we wouldn't embark on a phase 2 unless we were confident that this was successful and operating well and meeting expectations.
That's what I wanted to hear.
That's why the monitoring is important.
Okay.
So you're not, by endorsing this, you're not committing to a phase 2. And you're not even committing to an operating plan because we're not paying for the operating cost. This is something that would have to be ultimately negotiated by the partners, potentially the county, the cities of Clearwater and Dunedin.
What's nice about the restart plan or the phase one is there's some risk that is held by the operator. There's some risk that is held by the public entities, but there is no long-term commitment. Once you start taking federal dollars for vessels or docks or anything like that, and docks were not included, we said docks would be the responsibility of the local municipality at this point in this plan. But once you start taking federal dollars for any one of those things, then you're committed to operating that for the life of that capital asset. And the life of a bus, as you know from being on the PSCA board, is 12 years, 500,000 miles, and we keep ours 15 to 17 years. A boat, 25 more years, you're committing, and then if you stop operating that, then you pay back the federal money prorated.
So we're basically looking at post-COVID, give it a go, see how it works, evaluate it, and then depending upon the result and ridership and everything else associated with it, perhaps move into a different phase.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're comfortable at a staff level with that because this service has proven successful. It was just not operated fully under the expertise of a public transportation operator. And I think that additional institutional capacity will help.
Okay, thank you.
There are a lot of advantages to that in terms of cross-promotion, being in the things that we're already doing, an ability to really work together in a collaborative way and also provide oversight for federal regulations, safety and security, and those kinds of things.
Randy?
So I wanted to switch gears just a bit in anticipation of hopefully these recommendations passing today. I've had the honor of serving on this committee, and I did notice that you recommended that the committee continue to meet quarterly. So can you discuss a little bit what the role of the committee will be going forward? I mean, obviously our role was getting us to this point with, recommendations, oversight, program, like what will the role of the committee be?
So that was actually a conversation we had at the Waterborne meeting. We were debating when exactly we wanted to keep meeting, and the committee had decided that they wanted to keep meeting quarterly so that we could continue to evaluate the progress. As we start implementing the service, if we can get the funding commitments lined up for it, we want to have a way that we can stay accountable and be able to have the committee stay involved in the process. So I think the committee is very interested in continuing that and serving in that role, and that's why we're going to keep doing it.
Well, and I would just like to make a recommendation if I could. I was not able to attend that last meeting because we had our city council meeting at the same time. We've been very successful with this board and with our committees lining up the committee meetings to the board and being on the same day and maybe just being before. So that would be a recommendation. I think most of us kind of already hold this day. So if we could look at moving those meetings to be before, I think that would be helpful.
For sure.
It certainly works for me. I bet you it probably works for Mayor,
And it's- I
Mayor
mean-
Kennedy too. And I think what we wanted to do too was kind of really stay on top of the whole funding thing.
Yeah.
And how that's coming through, because there's lots of different angles that could take, and we wanted to be able to really talk about that and kind of focus now that we actually have a plan. In addition, monitor the data, because we're the ones recommending certain things, and we want to make sure what we recommended is working.
Absolutely. All right, well, it's been a pleasure to serve, and I want to thank staff because you guys have done an amazing amount of work. And thank you to PSTA. Thank you.
Any other questions at this time? Yes, Karen.
So a couple things is I think, it is very exciting. I think it's worth exploring, but don't make it an unfunded mandate coming back to the county. Because that's, we're already struggling with how we're doing, we just got a presentation last week, and we have a huge backlog of roads to repair with a huge price tag. And we don't have an immediate source of funding for that. We did talk, and I did support looking at the tourist development tax, because I do believe that this will be a tourist attraction more than it will be a commuter type of service. And so I think we definitely need to be very careful. I have supported the Cross Bay Ferry service, but this is kind of my last year of supporting it, because I think it needs to move into, they're going to get a federal grant to buy the boat, so they should start to be, more sufficient on other revenues. So I think I'll support this, but I think we just need to move cautiously. And then my other question is, and I think I heard it, but you are going to bid out the service. This should not be automatically given to the Clearwater passenger ferry service, as it should be robustly bid.
Not only did I hear you Thursday, but I double-checked with Brad, and I talked to my procurement department this morning. Yes, this will be a competitive procurement.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Dave, do you have anything at all?
Well, I just wanted to listen more than talk. I'm always a little bit concerned when we start down a path of we starting with, where we're going to be adding money immediately. Any transportation project that I've seen, I don't care which one it has been so far, has always taken heavy support by the public sector. And so again, I think the exciting part is that I think it is tourism based. I mean, I don't, again, I did not support the St. Pete Cross Bay Ferry. I haven't yet, and I'm still concerned in a lot of ways. But I always wanted to see, and I never could get any information that was supported for tourism. So this one, I think, has that nexus a little bit, and so I think there is some CVV funds. But to Commissioner Seal's point about funding challenges, I mean, each of you are in your own city governments, so you guys are dealing with it yourselves. I mean, we have massive issues on penny funding, for instance, like we're over, all the things that we need to do. We're at 125% maybe of what we have, and so all of those challenges. And then I don't want to keep bringing this up, but we have $30 trillion in debt in this country, and how that's going to affect us locally on every single level is yet to come. So I don't want to be, I'm not trying to put, a Debbie Downer here, but I'm just saying that as we embark on these things, it's going to have to be incremental, and it's going to have to be, we did the baby steps before. I was so proud of the fact that it was a private entity that did it, and maybe an underfunded, underfinanced private entity, maybe one that had, maybe more staying power or whatever, might have been able to, survive. Maybe not the pandemic issues, but so I'm really very skeptical about success on its own. So for me, phase one is going to be really important. I think I'm not even sure where we're going to get the funding for that. I mean, we're talking $600,000 a year. It's a lot of money, again. I think that, that there is some TDC support for it. I mean, for TDC monies that would be supportive of that. Now, whether the board, that board would be supportive or whether our commission would be is another issue. But yeah, I'm a little bit concerned and very excited about the potential at the same time, if that's even possible. So I do like the private venture a lot better than I do the public venture. It just never seems to work financially without tons of subsidy. And we will continue to have to subsidize the Cross Bay Ferry. It's just going to be that way. So it's not a transportation alternative. It's not a transit alternative to go to work. It's just kind of pleasure and a little tourism mixed in. And I think we're going to have that same thing here. So again, I really like the group that's been put together and has been working on it. It's all been very positive, and I think we've got something to build on here. So I probably will support the investigation of it, but at the end of the day, I don't know where that money is going to come from and who's going to come knocking and who's going to be expected to come forward with it. Has anybody looked at potential numbers as to how it's justified for tourism versus non-tourism uses? Has anybody come up with, we had some of those numbers from before.
You've looked at that, haven't you, Whit?
Well, we did ridership estimates. We've got some survey data that the Clearwater Ferry did previously. So we know when they were operating regularly, which we're looking to return to, who was using it. That was survey data that we helped them collect back in 2018, I think, Rodney. So we do have some basis of that. And then the Cross Bay Ferry is providing monthly reports on ridership and economic impacts and other things of that service. So that's part of what we see our mission is continuing this monitoring and reporting. And we'll call it as we see it. If we don't think that it's supportive and contributing to its mission, then that'll be our recommendation. One thing I do like about this, though, is that we don't have too many opportunities for 3 or more local governments to partner on transportation projects. Sometimes it's FDOT bringing money, and sometimes there's a little skin in the game from the local government. This is an example where if we want waterborne transportation, we're going to need multiple partners to step up and agree that there is a countywide value, there is support in developing a network using our waterways as an alternative as we grow as a community. And we don't want to negotiate from the dais, but that's a conversation that is ongoing, and it's a matter of, if the county is able to step in, I think the 2 cities will certainly participate, and PSTA's got some money in here as well for basic maintenance and upgrading of some of the infrastructure. So it is a nice partnership project, and we need those to get things to happen. And I do think we'll be in good position for federal funding and potentially state funding with that commitment.
Any other questions? Tina, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, and
I'm
this is...
sorry, Chair, I didn't get the second. I'm the second. Thank you.
So can I just ask what the motion is? The motion is for to receive the plan, or
Yes.
we don't have the funding sources
No,
or anything, so
no,
we're not
it's
approving.
just the plan.
You're approving
The
the
presentation.
amendment of the long-range transportation plan. You're recommending approval of a proposed phasing plan. And again, that's contingent on the commitment of dollars. And what's the third thing? The criteria, the policy, essentially, that Jared and Christina developed.
Yes, Gina.
Thank you. Can those all be voted on together, or should they be separated out? Or perhaps there is a board member who might want the items to be separated and voted on individually.
It's fine by me, if that's what the preference is. I go back to the maker of the motion.
Because they all 3 were the recommendations that came through the committee, and I think it's important that they stay together, that they work together. I don't know how they work individually. Right, but since it's 3 items, we all know sometimes those things are separated and legally should be voted on separately. That's why I asked. I wanted that to be clarified. Thank you.
What would you prefer me to do?
Well, I don't think legally we need to separate them. We can certainly ask our attorney to weigh in. The committee's recommendation was for all 3. None of those 3 commit anybody to any funding. So it's an amendment to the LRTP that recognizes it better than in the current long-range plan. It is the policy on how we would consider expansion, and it is the, what's the third thing? I'm sorry.
The recommendations as a whole.
The recommendation of having PSTA administer and, those things.
Okay, the lawyer says it can be voted in one motion. So we have a motion and a second. Tina, I know that we don't have to do a roll call on this because there's no funding available. Okay. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that, and thank you to everyone who's participated and also our great staff. With that, we will move down to the director's report, and I will ask Whit to cover the spotlight and any other items he'd like to at this time.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things to update everyone on. Mayor Bajowski hosted a phone call on the Honeymoon Island and Dunedin Causeway corridor improvements. And we, as you may know, because I think I talk about this almost every meeting, but there's always like a little bit more to tell you. That's been an ongoing effort to improve access and mobility. We learned on that phone call that the Honeymoon Island State Park entrance will be completed in the July timeframe, which we were all a little disappointed by. We had been told earlier it would be March, but they had a little trouble administratively getting their documents all in order once the funding arrived. That was on the state DEP. But they seem to be proceeding at a good pace, and so by July that will open. The State Department of Transportation has delivered a couple of concepts for, excuse me, a turnaround at the end of Dunedin Causeway at the entrance to the state park. That turnaround would essentially allow for vehicles in the queue waiting to get into the park to exit if the park closes. And the reason the parking lot would close is because with the expanded capacity of the entrance, it's going to fill up faster. They've yet to do that, to my knowledge, ever, because the length of time it takes cars to crawl in there, there's usually some turnover of those spaces, but with expanded capacity, that won't happen as to the same extent. So it's going to close during peak weekends. And it may close for 2-3 hours at a time, so you've got to give people an exit route. We heard pretty clearly from the park that they preferred the larger roundabout, and we're going to wait on other partners to weigh in on what their preference is. There's a cheaper alternative. That's about a $300,000 estimated cost, not including design, to build that roundabout at the turnaround. We don't yet know where that funding will come from because federal funds cannot be spent because it's inside the park entrance. State funds cannot be spent because it's not on the state highway system. And as of yet, the DEP they've said they're not going to pay for that. So that may be a local decision that we'll have to face. The third piece of it is we have a design concept that we're reviewing for improvements to Curlew Road and Alt 19 that would expand Alt 19 through that intersection to 4 through travel lanes and would include some other safety measures for walking and bicycling. And we've been working with DOT closely on that. That design will get wrapped up shortly, and then we will have construction in place for FY24 for that improvement.
Hey, Whit, are there any of those designs that were proposed that were a little bit odd or different being considered?
No, this is pretty traditional. We didn't get too crazy here because of the right-of-way impacts.
Oh.
So it's pretty traditional.
That left-hand turn concept was pretty good as far as moving traffic.
It works great, but you'd have to take out a couple of viable businesses there, and that would add to substantial costs. And then finally, the county was successful in winning a pretty substantial grant to install cameras, fiber optic cables, and variable message signs along that. In the meantime, that'll be funded in '24. In the meantime, we're getting temporary variable message signs installed by the county with Bluetooth technology, and the county will be holding a training session for city, park, and state staff so that they can change the signs to let people know as they're approaching that intersection or that causeway that the park is closed, and that way they can pick another destination for a while. I think it's all pretty positive development, and we're making progress, and that's good to see. And I think I misspoke, Jensen, FY23 on the causeway improvements at Alt 19, not 24. And then the other thing I'll mention is we've kicked off the Target Employment and Industrial Land Study update. We've had a couple of biweekly meetings. Jared is our project manager for that, and the consultant is in the process of identifying stakeholder partners to participate in the study management team and the advisory team. And so if you have industrial or target employment or other business contacts that you think would be interested in that, or even local economic development contacts, please make sure you let us know, and we'll be sure to provide those names and make sure we have a good representation of the entire county. We have committed to finishing that work by the end of this year and bringing that to a vote in November, as long as nothing unexpected happens. So the consultant is working under that assumption. Yes.
Question. I just wanted to just bring up for conversation, I don't know if Jensen can speak to it or not, but just the issue of Skinner Boulevard and the trail and the interim. So I don't know where that would fit in here, maybe after you're finished. I just wanted to make sure we had a moment to have that conversation.
Thank you. I can go ahead and address that now. That falls generally under this. As you know, there was a fatality on the Pinellas Trail crossing Skinner Boulevard in Dunedin one morning about 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And everybody rallied around that issue. And we've had great partnership with Joan Rice at the county and FDOT safety and design staff and other county staff and the city to figure out what can we do to make that crossing safer in the interim. And so the interim solution that is preferred by all the partners is to install a temporary traffic signal, a full traffic signal that would be red facing the trail until, and you would have to push the button to activate the cycle, and then depending on the timing of when you arrived, it wouldn't be an instant change. It would be timed with the signal at Alt 19 and Skinner Boulevard. You would have a green phase to allow trail users to then cross Skinner Boulevard. It would have a yellow phase, and then it would go back to a red phase, just like a full traffic signal. Cars would have a red phase when the bicycles and pedestrians are crossing Skinner. So that will be installed in about a month. I mean, it's coming soon. I believe the county is helping make that a more cost-effective solution by using some of their equipment and installing the signal, and the state is helping with funding. So I may have gotten some of those partnerships wrong, but I think that's the gist of it. It's a partnership. And we're going to monitor that, and we're going to see how effective that is. And that is temporary until the complete street solution, which is funded for FY23, is complete.
Yeah, and so just participating in that intersection, driving and walking and watching my biking cohorts, and even this morning, as the light, that's an intersection where it automatically starts flashing, okay, when you approach it, so you don't have to hit the button. Well, it's out right now. So you have to, nothing happens unless you hit the button. Well, today I saw two bicyclists, they're coming down and they just on the fly hit the button. And it doesn't even, it starts almost, but they're already into the intersection. So I guess I don't want to get into too much of the details and such, but just seeing how bicyclists work the trail, and the last thing I want to see is people getting killed. We've worked for, I don't know how many years to get people to understand that intersection. And this was the first fatality, and I found out after the fact who it was, and it was somebody that I'd kind of befriended on the trail. Just a really super nice guy that didn't even realize it had happened. It was him until a few weeks later. But so my only concern is that we have these two phases. There's an interim phase that we're going to take care of in this meantime. So we're changing the operation for an interim period, and then the final situation will be back to where we are now. It'll be, instead of 4 lanes through that, it'll be 2 lanes. It'll be back to the flashing. I'm assuming the automatic as you're approaching. It'll have a couple of roundabouts and safe street issues coming into the intersection. And so the question, and I got on the phone with the secretary just to talk through some of the concerns. I'm really worried that when we put this up, green, yellow, red light, it's kind of like a regular intersection, that there will not be people adhering to it on the trail. So we're going to have the drivers that are going to be now on green going through it. They're not slowing down. I mean, they probably will for a while. The question was, why don't we do something on an interim basis that looks like the final solution, so that we, use 2 lanes for now and, kind of move and leave the leave this current system in place so that we don't create a change that we've been working on for so long. And I guess one of the responses I got, the city of Dunedin was not in favor at the present, and they really wanted to kind of wait until the final solution. So I just want to bring that to, I brought it to Whit's attention, and I just, I'm really concerned about it, and I'm hoping that we've done our homework and then done it again. I know that I was told by FDOT that they're going to be out there in they'll have highway patrol, but they'll have either sheriff's office or somebody out there continuously for a while until they see the pattern changing. So I guess I'm not looking for any action or anything else. It's just, Joan, I don't know if you have any insight on this thing, but it really concerns me that we're going to do something temporarily, that we've taken so much time to get people thinking the other way. The hard part is getting, 4 lanes and getting eye contact with drivers, but it's changing bicycle behavior. And again, not all bicyclists, but many bicyclists. I think one fatality, is not enough to do that big abrupt change, in my opinion. But just maybe you have some insight on how the group, I don't know, maybe you do or maybe you don't. Feel free to.
Thank you very much. My name is Joan Rice. I work for Pinellas County Public Works. Commissioner Eggers, there were several alternatives that the group, which was for Pinellas, FDOT, county, and the city, all talked about. This is just the one that we decided to collectively together. Now, if for some reason it is not working, if we're monitoring and it's not working, there are other options that we can do after that, but this is the one that we all agreed to.
What was the downside of doing something on an interim basis that looks like the final solution? And again, it's not just the road work that we're talking about. We're talking about the trail approaching there. You can do some things to slow bicyclists down and that kind of thing. But just going ahead and getting rid of 2 lanes right now and just making it a 2-lane, 1 lane in each way early.
Correct. That was one of the topics. Concerns were the driveways that are right there. In order to reduce the number of lanes, we'd have to put a series of bollards up so that we would squeeze all the traffic down to the 2 lanes, slow the traffic down. But there are some driveways right there, right where the Holiday Inn Express is, and how would they have access in and out? And there was also concerns with the boats that were traveling from Broadway turning on, because at that point they have to merge down right away so they can get past to the trail. So those were the 2 topics that I heard the most from the city of Dunedin as to why they wanted to try this as an alternative instead.
But those issues will come up in the permanent solution too.
But they should be addressed during design, and they won't have the bollard sticking up, and it'll have curbing in the final design.
Okay, but it won't be blocking the lanes or the access points to the businesses?
No, that they should not be losing any kind of access to the businesses. It's just that, remember, if you have a bollard that's sitting upright and you're in a car trying to turn out, you have the bollards you have to look through. So that was part of the issues with it and being an interim.
Can I add something?
Yes.
When the elected part of the city discussed it, when Whit and Secretary, I think you might have been there too, Joan, everybody was there, with a cumulative recommendation, we did have concerns about, the change, and that the bicyclists blow through there right now. They blew through there before the flashing light, the automated flashing light. While we did see that got a little better, we still had a death. So in essence, it wasn't better. The flashing light, the automatic flashing light. And the reason we tried to do that was because they were blowing through that intersection and they weren't stopping to push the button. Everybody in the world says, stoplight, make everybody have to stop. We all expressed a lot of concern as to whether the bicyclists would do that. What we were told was that there was going to be new signage, and I don't remember all of it, all of what it was, but new signage on the trail multiple times to tell people they absolutely must stop, you know, to try to change the way they're thinking. As far as the lane reduction, I can tell you that none of the commissioners on my council said no to that. We were told that FDOT didn't want to do it because it would back up traffic on Alt 19. That's what we were told.
And again, I wouldn't.
I'm just saying.
I wouldn't take exception with that, but that's going to be the situation in the permanent. I mean, it's not.
Except that it'll be done differently. It's going to be narrow all the way from the Apex intersection.
Oh, you're talking about Western?
Yeah, I mean.
Not from Alt 19.
No, but I mean, it's going to be, so it's not going to have the same crushing effect that the temporary piece would. And we were told, because that was initially what we thought was going to happen. But then we were told that FDOT was very concerned about the backup of the traffic in either direction. And I don't really remember what.
And that's
the
fine. I don't
situation
want to take any more time, but I thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me talk about it. But I think it's important that, you know, that one of the things that I was told is there's going to be a presence there until patterns change, until people get used to it. So I don't know how long until the permanent solution is going to be, but I think FDOT should be prepared to stay there the whole time.
I think we've talked about a 30-day high visibility law enforcement, and it could be extended.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how that goes.
Dave, the other thing, and you know, this is not going to happen, but the other thing that we have talked about internally, and I know Whit will have a cow when I say this, but you know, there are bollards over there at Coachman that stop you from being able to ride through that intersection, where you'd have to get off and put your bike through it. And so, worst case scenario, that'll just happen. We'll just be going for that, because this is too crowded of an area. I mean, to be honest with you shouldn't be riding your, 25-mile-an-hour bike through that area anyways. It's really more pedestrian friendly in that area, but this is the first step.
They do.
But they do.
Thank you for the discussion. I would like to just add one thing. We've talked a lot about bicycles blowing through that intersection. The person who was killed was a pedestrian and was doing everything right. They were hit by a car for no real good reason. So it had nothing to do with bicycles blowing through there, the fatality.
That was really my point to begin with, that we have reacted with a solution that, again, I mean, it's taken a while to get to the point where we have been pretty safe there.
Yeah.
Again, so it's just going to be a different environment, a different dynamic.
I think there's a lot of concern about bicyclists in general that are reflected by how they behave at that intersection. But our crash data does not show a lot of crashes there. There are a lot of near misses, and there are a lot of people freaking out about, oh my goodness, that guy's going to get killed. And I understand that, but we just don't have the data showing it. And maybe it's because some of them are minor and they don't go reported. But if we had a ton of data, I would definitely report that to you, and I would share with you that we've got a real problem here.
I think the bicyclists that I worry about most are pretty adept. They are. I mean, when I see them flying down and hitting the button without slowing down, it's like, that's pretty adept. I mean, I'd have to almost slow down or stop.
It's hard
to.
to.
It is hard to do. And it's like, well, if I miss the button, then what?
Well,
So,
and we've got the Duke Energy Trail where we put in one of those flashing beacons at Bel Air Road. And the beacon is way over here, but the bicyclists are supposed to be on this side of the road. It's really hard to get over there and press that button. And I don't know, it just interrupts your flow a lot. So I get it, bicyclists should come to a stop at every stop sign, but it is really hard sometimes to do that.
It is.
And I want to stop, but it's hard sometimes. So
Well, I'm not preaching that they should stop or not. I'm just saying I'm worried about their health.
I totally
and
get it.
well-being. So.
And I appreciate that. All right, let's move on. Next item is just the Legislative Committee met earlier today. We didn't have a lot to talk about. Transportation and land use weren't overwhelmingly impacted by this session, unlike in other sessions. But we did have a transportation bill that the committee recommended that we weigh in on at the very end of the session. It's Senate Bill 398. I don't remember the House version, that would impose a 25% cap on public transportation spending out of the State Transportation Trust Fund, and that includes airports, seaports, aviation, in addition to agencies like Psta. We've never gotten close to 25%. I think 20% was the highest that we've ever spent. It excludes matching grants for federal funds. The House version does not include that 25% cap. The Senate version does. I asked the committee, should we weigh in with some of our key legislators and say, please support the House version, because I don't want to be in a position where I'm asking FDOT in 10 years to go back and lift the cap that was arbitrarily imposed if we ever start spending more on public transportation in the state. It just seems arbitrary. And I heard it came from the Road Builders Association. The committee made a recommendation to the full board to enable staff to make that request of the Senate. And so we have that item before this board. And I don't know if anybody from the legislative committee would like to make a motion or elaborate on that.
I don't have anything to say about it. I mean, you want me?
I mean, as the chair of the committee, it passed with what I would call lukewarm, unanimous support. I mean, we are in the final days of session. And so, how hard we push at this point for something that is likely to pass. It's already passed the House, but like Whit said, it did not have that cap in there. The Senate has its final vote coming forward, and that'll be sometime probably later on today or tomorrow. So, I mean, it's certainly up for discussion, but it did come through the committee unanimous. So I would go ahead and make the motion that we do ask staff to reach out and ask for the House language to be the one that is ultimately passed.
I'll second it. And then we'll have all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you. I'll just keep going. Let's see.
Why don't we do the 8D first, because I think you're going to take a while on that one. And the 8D is we had a discussion about the cancellation of the July or the August, and we decided July, right, Whit?
7D is the agenda item, yeah.
Okay.
So I asked Tina to reach out to the board members and see if there was a preference. It was suggested in one of our executive committee meetings that by canceling the July meeting, we align better with when some of our partners take a recess. And so we got some results back that were, as you see in the chart, 57% in favor of canceling July and 42.9% with no preference. So we got nobody strongly in favor of August cancellation, which we've done traditionally. So that would be our staff recommendation, and we would make that notice.
Is that I saw in your previous presentation that Rodney did that you were coming to us with some budget thing in July.
Well, last year we did it in June, so we can certainly do it in June. It'll be subject to any final change in, is it property assessments, Rodney? Yeah. So as of July 1, there's sometimes a new number that's updated. So it would be an adoption of the budget subject to whatever changes in July. And we handled that last year.
So we're looking for a motion to cancel the July meeting. Is there a motion? Is there a second?
That we cancel the July?
Is there a second? Second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and now we'll just go back to Whit and...
Well, the last thing I wanted to mention was on Thursday, I was invited last week to speak to the county about the transportation funding issue that Commissioner Seal referenced and Commissioner Eggers. And it was a good, productive discussion, and I was glad to be able to set a little context about Advantage Pinellas. It followed a presentation by the county on their comprehensive plan update, and there was a good discussion there about bike lanes. I think they were referencing our active transportation plan. So Commissioner Seal recommended that we go back and look at our proposed map for bike lanes and recognize that maybe bike lanes aren't suitable for all roads in the county. She referenced US 19 and some other facilities. So we will take a look at that and see what adjustments we can make. But otherwise, the county agreed to ask the staff, the BCC asked the staff to bring back some potential revenue options, not to include a sales tax this year, but other potential ways of funding transportation backlog that is both maintenance and mobility needs as well. And the point I wanted to make about all that was we've got all these federal grants that are coming our way, and our job is to bring as much of that as we can to Pinellas County, and we're going to need a match or a commitment for some of that, particularly for transit. And that's really where the tough part of it is, because we don't really have any additional capacity at PSTA. So it was a good discussion, and I just wanted to let everybody know that we had it. And that's really all I have today, Madam
Well,
Chair.
I'm going to put a challenge out there because Whit is making me go to the March 18th Bike Your City event in Gulfport. So I'm challenging all of you to, I'm going to ride in it, that you have to ride with me. So if anybody's around on the 18th in Gulfport, I'll buy you a smoothie.
With a sheriff's escort, so.
Oh, boy, oh, boy. Here we go. Just saying that. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor? Thank you for today. Thank you for coming.